The man who coined the term soft power recently died. It's ironic that Joseph Nye taught at Harvard University, a 4 centuries old institution that's at the heart of the Trump administration's crackdown on foreign students. Courts now stop the U.S. government's attempt to ban enrollment of foreign students at Harvard, but more suspensions of federal funding are in the works. And now comes a broader move. The State Department pausing visa applications for the U.S.'s more than 1 million foreign students. This, quote, in preparation for an expansion of required social media screening and vetting in a land that prides itself on its First Amendment of the Constitution guaranteeing free speech. Who then gets to decide when posting, for instance, a picture of a Palestinian flag constitutes a national security threat? A passing fancy or the true decline of U.S. soft power as Europeans try to lure students and researchers to migrate to these shores, as the U.K. moves to rejoin the Erasmus foreign student exchange program that the pro-Brexit Conservatives quit? We'll ask the panel to make sense of this pushback against foreign students and the use of social media posts as evidence for the prosecution. What does it say about the global order and the free flow of ideas and information in today's world? Today in the France 24 debate, is it the end of U.S. soft power? With us, Bernard Harcourt, professor of law and political science at Columbia University. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
From Washington, he obtained his PhD in government from Harvard University. Jay Green, senior research fellow in education policy at the Heritage Foundation think tank. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Ellen Kuntz, professor at the INSEC Business School here in Paris. Good to see you.
Happy to be here. Thanks, François.
And from New York City, Lola Diaz-Sentis, member of Harvard Students for Freedom. You are an undergraduate entering your senior year. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're on the go, by the way, you can always listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, first reported by news site Politico, the U.S. State Department issuing a directive that suspends the processing of all student visas for foreigners. This until further guidance is issued. This follows the latest salvos by Donald Trump. At first, on Sunday, specifically targeting Harvard University, saying 31% of the student body being foreign is too much for him. And now talking more broadly.
Lists. They have foreign students. About 31% of their students are foreign-based, almost 31%. We want to know where those students come. Are they troublemakers? What countries do they come? We want to be able to see why, these countries aren't helping us. They're not investing in Harvard and all of our, we are. So why would 31%, why would a number so big? I think, number one, I think they should have a cap of maybe around 15%.
Bernard Harcourt, your reaction to that, and by the way, Columbia also has a sizable number of foreign students.
Yeah, we actually have higher numbers. We're at about 39%. But I think that the American universities have become global universities. They're premier international universities. They cater to the world now. That's one of the strengths, really, of the United States and its universities. And the result is that, we've expanded, and now we have large populations of students from across the world, right? We are the #1 destination for students around the world. People want to come to American universities because they're considered to be the best. Right? And it's an easy story. It's a logical story. And it's in part, it was part of a business model for these universities. I mean, they've expanded in those areas. Columbia University has a global footprint. We have global centers around the world. And that's something that we feel, that the university administration feels wedded to in a way to kind of offer the best possible education in the world, right? It's that simple.
Just to be clear for our viewers, are these public institutions or private institutions? They get a lot of federal funding.
Right. So, well, that's one thing that kind of has all of a sudden become more clear is how much federal funding they receive, particularly in the natural sciences, in medicine, particularly, and so these are nonprofit private universities. These schools, the Harvards, Columbias, the other Ivy Leagues, et cetera, but they compete for, right, and receive an enormous amount of federal funding to conduct the kind of premier research that brings students from around the world to the United States. And that brings researchers from around the world to the United States as well. So a good percentage of our faculty are international, are from abroad, in part because people for a long time, at least since America invested in higher research, have come to believe, right, that the best place to do research, advanced research in medicine and in other areas, is in the United States.
Jay Green, why is Donald Trump calling to reduce the number of foreign students at Harvard, and do you agree with him?
Look, these elite institutions are not global universities, even if they wish to think of themselves that way. They are located in a country. They must follow the laws of that country. And they also receive very large subsidies from taxpayers in that country. And all of that obligates them to serve American interests and be American institutions and not simply think of themselves as global institutions. And so the International Exchange Program was a good use of soft power. And by the way, Joe Nye, I was his teaching assistant when I was at Harvard, so I'm familiar with the idea of soft power. The soft power is to advance American interests, not to advance the interests of other countries. But we try to advance those interests in a variety of ways. But at a certain point of enrollment, the international exchange goes in the opposite direction. So rather than advancing American interests, spreading American values around the world, we begin importing other people's values and advancing the interests of other countries, which I understand they may wish to do, but that may not be in the interest of the American government and the American taxpayer.
Isn't it a two-way street? Isn't that what the dialectical process at universities is all about?
So obviously, the intellectual exchange of having people from around the world get together and share ideas is desirable. But you want to have the right mix for the right purposes. And so the question is, how high is too high? Now, as recently as 2 decades ago, the total size of foreign student enrollment in the U.S. was about half what it is now. We now have 1.1 million foreign students in the United States. And as we've been discussing at elite institutions, it's between 1/4 and 1/2. These are institutions that have not significantly expanded their overall enrollment, so they're displacing American students, significantly enrolling foreign students. And by the way, in that mix of foreign students, you don't just have those who are seeking the best education around the world. You also have people seeking to influence American foreign policy and American domestic policy. And in fact, there was just a graduate from Columbia who had been an undergraduate student for 17 years at 4 different institutions. Now, either he was an independently wealthy, eccentric lover of learning, or perhaps he was a paid agent who spent a lot of time at universities to promote the interests of the people who were paying
But isn't that an outlier?
And we have those people too.
Isn't that an outlier?
Well, it is it's the average foreign student is educationally productive, focused on studies and research, but you get at 1.1 million, you can get a critical mass of troublemakers, and they can cause a lot of disruption, and it's perfectly legitimate for the Trump administration to want help in identifying who the troublemakers are and removing them. And one of the difficulties is that the universities have failed to cooperate. They have failed to discipline their students who are engaged in misconduct out of fear that disciplining them will identify bad acting foreign students and potentially have their visas revoked. And so they're acting like sanctuary cities, shielding bad acting foreign students who are in the minority from the consequences of their actions. And so it's forcing the administration then to take extra steps to try to identify these bad actors.
Ellen Kuntz?
Wow, what we're hearing about is all of a sudden autocracy, how we get there. What Mr. Green is describing has a name. It's called ideological capture. And unfortunately, the Trump
Explain why.
Ideological capture means that the free flow of ideas in an open society will be tampered by a government. I'm amazed to think that the Trump administration thinks that they have any business interfering with what private schools choose to do. Of course, if there are, difficult cases, a total outlier case, of course. But in the past, those have always been treated, and that has not been the norm of what Fordham students represent. I think it's a very emotional topic for most of us here because for myself, for example, I was a foreign student coming to France. My daughter went to Erasmus, so it's really a lot to imagine that all of a sudden that these young people who are trying to educate themselves are the heart of any particular problem. And I think what's particularly ironic to hear here is that in this age of tariffs and not knowing how the tariff war is going. This is one of the things where we have an enormous surplus. The 1.1 million students you're talking about, sir, represent about $40 billion a year for the U.S. economy. So it's wrong all over, and it represents this very dark and menacing notion of ideological capture that the government is trying to interfere.
Bianco, a year ago, when there was the tents on the campus of Columbia University, there were awkward moments on all sides when it came to bringing in the police, how they were dismantled, how it was handled by the university, how hearings before Congress were handled by the university. But what do you say to what was just said there by Jay Green about the universities shielding people who have nefarious interests when it comes to the United States?
I think that's really... honestly, I think that's just smoke and mirrors. It's some kind of red herring. It's the plan by Republicans for decades. This is not new, and the plan from the Heritage Foundation, where Mr. Green is, before October 7th, right? Project 2025. If you read it, it's in 30 pages on higher education. It's basically to kneecap liberal arts colleges and universities. It's in very simple terms.
How so?
Very simple. They want to stop funding kind of traditional colleges and universities and instead focus on vocational training, focus on military academies, focus on religious institutions. Those are their words, not mine. Okay, and this is not new. It's not new to Project 2025. For many years we overlapped in the government department, Jay, you and I, at Harvard. But there was this, there was a book in the 70s called Harvard Hates America, right? And it goes back, this idea that Harvard is not serving the interests of the conservative parties. It goes very far back, and I would say at this point, right, all of these claims about a bad actor here, a bad actor there, are really being weaponized to fulfill a Project 2025, or much before that, to kind of kneecap Harvard, Columbia, and the elite institutions, which have always been viewed as too progressive and as kind of churning out progressive students, right? You have to understand that the major statistic to keep in mind here is that graduates who come out of these elite institutions and who have college degrees vote for the Democratic Party. Okay, that's the one statistic that should be on top of every discussion of what's going on right now. And so it's politics. It's also different political views. These are very substantive and important political debates to have, actually. Very important substantive debates to have about the kind of society that we want, right? Project 2025, in its articulation, eliminates what's called gender ideology. It eliminates DEI. It wants to eliminate Title VI on race discrimination. It wants to eliminate Title IX on gender discrimination. Now, those are substantive questions that we should be debating in a way. We should really be debating those questions. Do we want a world? Is that the kind of world that we want? Just to be very simple, in Project 2025, they say due process. I mean, it's a part of it is a response to the Me Too movement, right? And says we need more due process for the accused. And we need to get rid of a lot of the ways in which Title VI and IX are being used. Now, I'm actually a criminal defense attorney in another part of my life. So I'm very much in favor of due process rights, right? But I mean, these are discussions we have to have in a way on the substance. I think that what's going on, though, when we talk about this idea that there's a critical mass of troublemakers coming from abroad. I mean, that's not.
Jay Green, just to be clear, can you quantify how many of these troublemakers, as Donald Trump calls them, there are?
Well, we don't have an exact count, but we know that there are significant numbers, and that's been well documented. And there have been detentions and attempted deportations of several of them. And obviously we can have a dispute about how serious this problem is, but the truth is that because all of these universities do reside in the United States and are subject to U.S. law, they must obey the Civil Rights Act if they receive federal funding, and they must also receive visas for their students if they come from abroad. And all of that means that they have to be responsible partners with the government and serve American interests, and not simply be global institutions.
So
now,
define what American interests are for us.
Mm-hmm. So, well, they are what the American electorate decides they are, and that can change over time. But the point is that it's decided by people who are citizens here, and ought to grow organically from the interest and discussions of people here. And so there's no conspiracy to destroy universities. Universities are free to have all the discussions they want, but if they receive other people's money, or if they wish to receive students from abroad, then there are rules they have to follow, and these universities have not been following those rules. They've been violating the civil rights of Jewish students in particular, and they have also been failing to report misconduct or crack down on misconduct by foreign students, and that shields the exact number that have been misbehaving. That's what caused the Trump administration to demand disciplinary records of foreign students from Harvard so that they could have a better idea of how widespread this problem is.
All right,
Harvard has refused to provide that information.
All right, the president burnishing his Man of the People credentials in the past week with this posting to Truth Social, where he said, "I'm considering taking $3 billion of grant money away from a very anti-Semitic Harvard and giving it to trade schools," all caps, all across our land. What a great investment that would be for the USA, and so badly needed. The words in that posting to Truth Social by Donald Trump. Jay Green, that sounds a lot like what Bernard Harcourt was describing as part of the manifesto in the Project 2025 of your organization. Is he using one of your talking points there?
It's unclear to me why American taxpayers should subsidize extremely wealthy universities that fancy themselves global institutions, as opposed to trade institutions that do help Americans prepare for trades that we badly need. It's not obvious to me that one is more deserving of taxpayer subsidy than the other. And so there's an odd sense of entitlement among elite institutions to taxpayer dollars without serving the interests and values of those taxpayers.
It's this young lady should go.
I want to bring in Lola Diacentis on this. And by the way, Lola, thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. We spoke with several foreign students from Harvard University who, fearing that there would be a retribution if they joined our show, decided not to take part. The semester is over, so you're back in New York City, but what is the mood?
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. Something that I think is really important to stress as we talk about Harvard's funding that it receives from the federal government is that some of that funding, and not some of it, all of it, is earmarked for specific causes. And oftentimes, the things that that money is going towards include cancer research, include hospitals, include research on the climate, which are things that benefit everybody. I'm an American student. I'm from New York State. And one of the best parts about going to Harvard, to be completely honest, is meeting students from around the world. So not only are they contributing to our campus by providing life-saving research and bringing their knowledge, but also as an undergrad and as an American student myself, I really benefit from having foreign classmates because they bring perspectives and cultures and languages that I would not otherwise know. So I think that Harvard, part of the reason that they're able to provide such a good education that really gives you a 360-degree look at everything is because we have the perspectives of our foreign students in the classroom. So I have many friends from foreign countries and American friends, and really having such exposure to all different types of people is part of what makes Harvard such a great school.
And Lola, you
yes,
heard Jay Green stating that it's a school that gets federal funding and it should defend American interests. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, Harvard does receive federal funding, and I think that Harvard receiving federal funding to me is a little bit separate from whether or not we're attacking our international students. We can have a debate on how much federal funding Harvard receives. I think that people on both sides of the aisle, when they see Harvard's endowment, have the amount of money that Harvard has saved up, have a lot of mixed feelings about the money that Harvard receives from the federal government. And I think that that is a debate that we can have. But having it in this highly politicized manner in which international students and freedom of speech on college campuses is coming under attack is not the way to have that conversation.
Yeah, well, but I just want to emphasize something that our brilliant student Lola said at the beginning, but that might get lost in the shuffle. These aren't subsidies. Yeah. These are not subsidies. It's not like the federal government is subsidizing Columbia or Harvard, right? These are grants for research. These are scientists have come up with ideas of new cancer treatments, new medical treatments, and applied to receive money to fund that particular research. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about research that's going on at universities, but it's not as if you know, the federal government is signing a check and saying, here, Harvard, here, you know, here's $1 billion, here, Columbia, here's $1 billion, do what you want with it. I mean, you have to understand, these are grants that people have applied for to do specific research.
And earned.
Yeah. Right? And they're being denied wholesale because of this policy, but also individually because they concern something about sexuality or something, I mean, a forbidden topic, race or gender or something like that, right? But this isn't just money that goes in our pocket. So, for instance, you know, there are different schools at different universities, and a lot of tension is created. But, you know, at the law school, at Columbia Law School, we don't receive any federal money because we don't do scientific research like
right.
that.
The attack on foreign students, part of a broader assault on public funding for education that's particularly crucial for Harvard University, but it's not the only one in the Boston area. The whole of that area draws the most medical scientists, bioengineers, biochemists by far of all the United States. The Economist did a story on it last week where, Jay Green, they talked about the fact that when there is those grants that are given to Harvard, it's kind of like an automobile factory that has a lot of small and medium-sized businesses around it. That also means that there's going to be more money going the way of smaller higher learning institutions throughout the Massachusetts area. Is it not shooting oneself in the foot to be reducing those science grants from the government?
So first, I just want to clarify that these universities are receiving gigantic subsidies, and they are subsidies. So, for example, in research grants, for every dollar that Harvard or Columbia receive for research, they get another 60 cents for overhead. And that overhead is essentially a slush fund that cross-subsidizes everything else that occurs at the university. And given the scale of federal research funding for these institutions, the size of that subsidy is several $100 million a year. Now, it's also true that students who enroll at these institutions receive taxpayer-subsidized loans. So in about a dozen different ways, these private universities are receiving general subsidies that are fungible dollars to be used by these institutions for whatever they want. And so while we might be worried about the economic ecosphere in Cambridge, Massachusetts, frankly, there are hundreds of research-intensive universities around the country, and there are lots of trade schools, and there's no reason why all of this money or all of these students have to go to Columbia or have to go to Harvard. There are very good research institutions at Vanderbilt, WashU, Duke, that don't have the same disorder, civil rights violations that these other institutions have, and there's no reason why taxpayer subsidy should be going to these problematic institutions instead of to better run institutions that can serve the needs of the American people better.
Ellen Kuntz?
Okay, so as with many things in the Trump administration, the intention is quite frightening. Every time that Mr. Green is talking about civil rights violations, it's because the Civil Rights Code has been completely rewritten. The Civil Rights Act has been pretty much emptied, and the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice has been ideologically, changed. So, of course, all of a sudden there's a civil rights violation when the original meaning of what civil rights, when it was originally put into place in the 1960s, has been totally reworked and changed in the prism of Project 2025. So I think that we're just in an era where we're going to have to see who capitulates and who doesn't. And it's important that there are institutions that have the deep pockets of Harvard, a $53 billion endowment. I mean, I think that we can't confuse the audience here. It costs $70,000 plus to go to these elite schools, all the Ivy League schools. So it's not like, there is some sort of massive subsidy to go to these schools. It is reserved for the elites. I think it's also extremely ironic that, Donald Trump, who is an Ivy League graduate himself, J.D. Vance, who went to Yale, and certainly many members of his cabinet are turning their backs on their own schools. They're alumni of these schools, and they're turning their backs.
Let me ask you about France, because here, we don't have the same tuition fees,
right.
And we're poor. We don't have as well the same number of. We have slightly more foreign students by percentage of it nationally,
proportionally, yeah.
But not much more. Is there this? What's the attitude of the government when it comes to those foreign students here?
Well, they have something in French that would be called the droit de réserve. They're much more neutral. And I think that they're less concerned with trying to interfere with what schools are trying to teach. There's less interference with curriculum, with faculty, with staffing, things like that. So yes, of course, the foreign minister in France looks at how many student visas are given out every year. But at the same time, they don't seek to interfere with curriculum, which is suddenly happening here in this move to autocracy we have in America.
1.1 million foreign students in the United States. The vast majority come from, by the way, either India or China, not generally known as hotbeds of pro-Palestinian activism, slowing approval for foreign student visas. That's drawing a reaction this Wednesday from the Foreign Ministry in Beijing.
China has always believed that only by adhering to openness and cooperation can the path of innovation and development become broader. We value international exchange in scientific and technological innovation and believe that the fruits of such innovation should benefit all countries.
Lola DeSantis, tell us about the foreign students you frequent.
Yeah, I also just want to quickly make a clarification. I think earlier it was said that Harvard and these elite institutions are for the elite. I would like to clarify that they're oftentimes can be that way, but not always. Harvard does have a sticker price of $80,000, but they do give out financial aid, and that financial aid actually comes from their own pockets and from their alumni donors. So I do think that's important to clarify that it is true that we get aid, but it's from our own pockets and not from the federal government. And I think that's, again, part of what makes Harvard so great. Going back to your question, is that because Harvard has the ability to give this financial aid, that means that they have the ability to bring in the best of the best and the brightest of the brightest from all across the country and all across the world, because for them, tuition prices aren't as much of an issue at Harvard. So I think that it's just so amazing that Harvard really does bring people in based on talent and based on merit and skill. I have international friends from so many different countries, from so many different parts of the world, many of whom prior to Trump's attack on Harvard were really just trying to get their education. I have friends who work in labs and friends who are really just like any American student. It really wasn't until Trump started attacking international students that international students began to become politically engaged because they felt that they needed to fight for their own rights to stay in this country and to receive the education they worked so hard for. And many international students, most international students, are still afraid to speak up because they're very much aware of the consequences and the risks of speaking up and protesting in the United States as foreign students. So yeah, I think the idea that foreign students are coming here to make trouble is completely false. The trepidation and the fear that I've seen from foreign students since January really has been startling, to say the least.
Yeah, a long list of foreign students we reached out to join this panel, and they said, not today, thank you.
Right, no, and as a foreign, if I were a foreign student, I would certainly not be on this panel. Right? And I would be not talking about
Which is scary.
Right?
Which is scary.
Which is, well,
discouraging.
Some might say un-American, perhaps. I mean, some people might say that what America stood for was the fact that you can speak and express your political opinions. So, I mean, I think
without retribution.
Without retribution. I mean, so yeah. I mean, it's a puzzling time. It's a puzzling time. I will say though, you brought up this, and we watched that clip. You know, I think there are lots of moving forces going on here. The cover clearly is the issues of anti-Semitism, which are being which there's no doubt that there's been an increase in anti-Semitic acts at Columbia and other elite institutions, as there were increases in, say, racist acts during the Black Lives Matters movement. So there's no doubt. But that issue is being weaponized in these debates. And I think it is important to then look at what else is going on. So I brought up the history. You brought up the fact that half of the students are from China.
India or China?
Well, at Columbia, we have approximately 13,000 foreign students. 6,000 about are from China, 1,000 from India about. So that's also something that probably we should be thinking about and trying to understand, because I think that part of this effort is geopolitical.
Yes.
And part of this effort is targeting China in this question of higher education, research, et cetera. And so, Jay was talking about, the overhead, for instance. I mean, the basic point here, of course, is that there are ways to deal with these issues that don't involve trying to, in a way, strangle a university. I mean, on the questions of overhead, look, foundations have limits on overhead that are different than what the federal government provides for. You can bring the federal government overhead down. Overhead, what does that mean? It means basically if you get $1 million to conduct some scientific research and you hire someone, it turns out you're going to need a building, right? You're going to need a building to have them in. And you're going to need, you're going to need maintenance staff, right? And you're going to need cleaning staff for that building. And you're going to need, now we need a lot of public safety officers for that building, right? That's overhead. So you get a $1 million grant, say, but that's not funding all of the expenses associated, right? But we can deal with that. We can talk about that. We can reduce overhead a little bit or bring it down to 15%, whatever.
But I want to get back to your previous point. You're saying that a lot of this is about China.
Well, yeah.
Or some of it, at least.
I think a big piece of this is also about China.
So Jay Green, let me ask you, do you agree with that? And is it better to have Chinese students come to the United States and go back perhaps as ambassadors for what they being, again, I get back to the soft power of Joseph Nye, ambassadors for the American way of life when they return home, or is it better to tell them, please don't come?
Again, the average international student, including the average Chinese student, is hardworking, is contributing to the educational and research activities at universities. So this is not a concern about the average student. It's a concern about a radical tail. But at 1.1 million, it's large enough that tail of the distribution can be really problematic. This is certainly the case with Chinese international students. So there's a news report out of an independent paper at Stanford that every single graduate student from China at Stanford has a minder from Chinese security apparatus. So they're engaged in espionage, they're engaged in spying on fellow Chinese to make sure that they are not doing things to undermine the Chinese communist regime. And so
is it better to have those Chinese students or not?
Change is helpful.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Is it better to have those Chinese students go to the U.S. or not?
It's better to have a mix of students from around the world, but really this is a question of dosage, right? What's good at a moderate dose can be problematic at too high of a dose. So when I was in school, it was roughly 5 to 10% international students at selective universities. Now it's between 1/4 and 1/2. And the question is, how high do we want it to be to get the benefits of international intellectual exchange and to attract top talent, versus the dangers of letting in people who are going to make trouble, who are going to steal intellectual property for commercial or security reasons.
Oh, we don't have enough time to get deep into what trouble could mean. The late John Lewis would talk about getting into good trouble. And I think that this is just kind of an assault on black and brown people and minorities across the world and from around the world. I mean, India and China have billion-strong populations, so yes, they can send many thousands of students and it's still a drop in their bucket. There's something much more sinister afoot here, and the intention is not okay. Even within a totally different category of schools, right? They're talking about, let's, fund other types of schools. Okay. The first Trump administration funded something called HBCUs, which are historically black colleges and universities. And now they're interfering with who are on the boards of these schools. So not only are they reducing the funding, they're changing deeply the ideology. That's why I get back to this notion of ideological capture, which is so frightening. They're okay with black and brown people learning things as long as it's the things that Project 2025 says it's okay to learn. So we've really come into a new era, slip slide into autocracy here.
Jay Green,
Yeah, I think it's also...
Go ahead, Lola DeSantis.
I just wanted to add really quickly, I think it's also really important, Jay mentioned students stealing intellectual property. for their home countries. I think if anything, Trump's plan has backfired because I know Harvard's commencement is tomorrow, and I have several friends who are international students who were originally planning on staying in this country and contributing to our economy as researchers or staying at the university, but are now too afraid to stay here and will be going home and will be bringing their talent and their education back to their home country rather than keeping it here as they had originally planned. So if anything, it's backfired.
Jay Green, your thoughts on this issue, because again, it's this question of the slashing of the number of foreign students, and it's also this soft power, how it's projected through those students coming to the United States, and how the U.S. projects itself abroad. Joseph Nye, again, the guy who coined the phrase, referenced a Norwegian historian, Geir Lundestad, who beyond the term soft power talked of the U.S. as an empire by invitation. In his final contribution to the opinion project, to the opinions journal Project Syndicate before his death this month, Nye wrote the following, he wrote, I have it here in front of me, if Trump thinks he can compete with China while weakening trust among American allies, asserting imperial aspirations, destroying USAID, silencing Voice of America, challenging laws at home, and withdrawing from UN agencies, he is likely to fail. Do you agree with that? That, again, the things that set the United States apart from the hard power of the likes of Russia and China, if you do away with them, what's the attraction?
So American higher education remains incredibly attractive to international students. And we're talking about problems at, a half dozen universities. And there are several hundred Research One universities. Those are universities engaged in high levels of research. And international students are welcome at all of these institutions. It may be that Harvard and Columbia may not be as attractive going forward, and Duke or Vanderbilt or WashU will be more attractive going forward. And I don't understand how that diminishes the ability of America to project power around the world or to show off its virtues, or to benefit from the ideas and talents that other people have to bring from outside the U.S. into the U.S. So all of that still is occurring. This is not a problem for higher education in America. This is a problem for Harvard and Columbia and a handful of institutions that have basically made a problem for themselves. And they've made a problem for themselves by enabling very bad acting students to engage in the disruption of the education of their fellow students. And frankly, that is a civil rights violation. I don't think we can dismiss, Jews count too, and you're not allowed to block Jews from crossing campus to get to their class. You're not allowed to push a Jew who's trying to return to his dorm because you don't want him to walk across your protest. All of these things occurred at Harvard.
And this is done by foreigners, is what you're saying.
And the Jewish president of Harvard has intervened so that no longer happens.
Well, overall, I think it's kind of paradoxical or ironic that, my colleague from the Heritage Foundation is, part of Project 2025 is also that we should have more funding of international programs that are about the free market, about free market, and it's ironic that that the government here and the Heritage Foundation wants to dictate, which universities people want to go to. If they want to go to Harvard, it's because Harvard and Columbia, have, made things attractive for students to be there. That's and it's just kind of odd that would be now we step in and decide we're going to get people to go somewhere else.
Dictators dictate, my dear.
We need a whole nother hour, unfortunately. I'm sorry to cut all of you off because we're short on time. Bernard Harcourt, I want to thank you. I want to thank Ellen Kuntz. I want to thank Elodie Ascendis for being with us from Rochester, New York. Jay Green from Washington, D.C. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.